Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Take Charge of the Classroom, a web series designed to help disrupt outdated behavior management models and help you create the classroom culture of your dreams. In this episode, we are looking at interpersonal skills that we can help grow in students. Rather than just hoping that they figure their emotions out and figure out how to be nice to each other and talk to each other without snapping each other's heads off, we can actually teach and model certain things for our students. In this episode, we are looking at emotions because emotions act as our guidance system. They are our GPS. And quite honestly, a lot of times when we have misbehavior in a classroom, when students are just acting out of control, it's highly likely that their emotions are likewise out of control, that they are agitated, they've got strong emotions, and they just don't know how to deal with them. That's where a lot of our misbehavior comes from, at least the big outbursts. How do we deal with that? Well, there are some things that we can do to teach students about their emotions, how to regulate their emotions, and if we can do that, we're going to go a long way toward helping take charge of the classroom. In the larger context, we are looking at the grow section of the take charge model. We've looked at the intrapersonal the last time around, and that was looking at grit and growth mindset. But this time we're looking at interpersonal skills that we can help grow. Because we don't just want to eliminate negative behaviors. We also want to encourage the good behaviors. We also want to teach them about the things they should be doing instead of simply stopping the bad behaviors. So in these interpersonal skills, we are going to be looking at social emotional literacy and empathy. And this is specifically looking at student actions and what students are doing to exemplify these skills. So where do we start? Well, social emotional intelligence. It's going to be hard to have been a teacher for the last 5 years and not hear about SEL, social emotional learning, or social emotional intelligence. There are a lot of systems out there. There are a lot of good programs out there. Some are fairly simple, some are fairly complex, and you have to purchase an entire kit. So I'm just going to give you just a brief overview of just the theory behind social emotional intelligence, and you can implement this without necessarily buying a curriculum. This comes from Mark A. Brackett in the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, one of the leading figures and the leading thinkers in social emotional intelligence. And so he recommends 5 different things that we can do with our students. First, we need to teach students to recognize their emotions. And all of this comes from talking to them like a direct teach, but then also modeling it for students. But if we can help students recognize their emotions, recognize not only their emotions in their thoughts, but also physiologically, what happens to their body when they're angry, when they're sad, when they're excited. And do they feel it in their skin? Do they feel it in their stomach? Do they feel it in their blood rushing up into their face? But just realizing that emotions are not these out of control, just random things that take over their bodies, but they're just physical reactions. Just like anything else that might happen if something happens to you physiologically. That helps them get at least that first step in taking charge of their own emotions, is recognizing that they do have a physiological component, and they do come and they do go. And that's that second part, understanding what causes emotions. And especially understanding that emotions are triggered by events, by memories, but they are transitory. That means they do not last. And emotions are simply natural occurrences. They do not represent that person. And so this is where we make a fine distinction. But when someone is angry, right, we want to help them describe, I feel angry, but they are not angry. Angry is not necessarily a core part of their being. Or they feel sad. They don't necessarily embody sadness. And so helping them understand that emotions are kind of like clouds in the sky, right? They roll in, they blot out the sun for a little bit, but then they roll right back out. And helping students understand that emotions come, that emotions go, and they are not permanent, they're transitory. That also helps, because sometimes students just feel like emotions just kind of rule their lives and they're uncontrollable, and they don't really know when they're coming or how strong they're going to be. Third, label emotions, right? But with a nuanced vocabulary. So we don't necessarily want the crayon box that just has 8 colors, right? We want the 64 color crayon box with a sharpener in the back. So we want to not just use words like happy, sad, mad, right? But distressed, lethargic, serene, tranquil, right? There are some really good mood meters out there, which actually came out of Mark Brackett's Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Tons of them that you can just Google. You can either buy them, but you can just Google some images and just put them up there. The mood meter is great because it's got 100 different emotions on 2 different axes, and they're really close and they're really nuanced. And so you can just kind of take 2 emotions that are next to each other and just kind of discuss the slight variation between the 2. If you've got younger students, there are some great mood meters out there with that have emojis, right? So they're more pictorial, and these would be great items to put in your safe place or your calming corner, because that's a big part of that calming corner procedure, is to label their emotions, right? So we recognize emotions, we understand what causes them, we label them with a nuanced vocabulary, right? More than just the big words like happy, angry, sad. But then we also learn to express emotions within cultural norms, right? When is it okay to make a joke? When is it okay to be happy? When is it okay to be sad? What are the different contexts in school, in church, at home that we can do various things? And so learning how to express emotions appropriately is also an important part of the social emotional intelligence. And then finally, how do we regulate? How do we learn to kind of observe our emotions, label them, but then also choose a different emotional state, or just kind of ride out the storm and then just let it pass? And so these are some things that we can do with our students, and there's a lot more that you can search for. But if you could do these with your students, if you could just say, you know what, I want to take a little bit of time each week, and I want to talk about emotions, and I want to talk about how we can express emotions and how we can label emotions, and even how we can regulate our emotions through breathing, through mindfulness, through meditation. You are doing your students such a service by helping them learn about their emotions and by helping them regulate them, because this causes, like I said, so much of the negative behavior in the classroom. And you notice we have an acronym here, RULER, RULER. So that's the acronym that the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence uses to just kind of keep in mind how we can help students rule or become rulers of their emotions. So with knowledge of emotions, why do we talk about emotions so much? Why is it so important? You know, you might be thinking, well, I'm paid to teach math, or I'm paid to teach chemistry, not emotions. Well, guess what? It's not really the lack of math, the lack of chemistry that's keeping your students from learning. It's their emotions that are getting in their way, right? The emotions they're bringing in with them, the emotions that are coming up in their class, in the classroom, that are causing them to not learn because their minds are on different things. So once we learn how to regulate our emotions, we get that sense of power, that sense of control over our emotions. It's not an unknown thing, it's a known thing. And with knowledge comes power. And that is just so important for students to be able to feel like they can have control over, any part of their lives, right? Students are very much into exerting their autonomy and learning about who they are and how they can affect their lives. And emotions sometimes just feel like something that is out of control. So when we give them the knowledge of emotions, when we let them know how they work, what they're called, how we can kind of change our moods, that gives them power and control. Now, there's one thing that's related to emotions that kind of falls underneath this big umbrella of emotional intelligence, but we really want to drill down on, and that is empathy. So empathy is feeling what others feel. And that is something that we want to talk about, and we want to model, and we want to directly instruct our students in empathy, because it affects everything, right? Studies have shown that people with heightened empathy have greater health, greater wealth, greater happiness. better relationship satisfaction, greater resilience, right? As your empathy goes up, as your ability to feel what other people feel, everything that we want in life increases. So this is something that we want to nurture in students from a young age, because this is going to help them in life. This is definitely going to help their behavior, because it promotes kindness. Empathy promotes pro-social behavior, moral courage. These are all the things that we want in our students. And a lot of this is coming from Michelle Borba's work, Unselfie. It's a great book. But empathy is something that we really want to exert in our classroom through our teaching, through our modeling, through everything we do, because it really shuts down a lot of the negative behavior when our students are kind, when they have moral courage, when they have these pro-social behaviors and these leanings, because it reduces bullying, it reduces aggression, it reduces racism. Once again, everything we want in the classroom we can get by increasing empathy. So how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of different ideas in that book, Unselfie, by Michelle Borba, but here's just a few examples, right? So when you hear a student say something unkind to another student, they just kind of snap at them. You can do a do-over, right? You can call that student over and say, all right, so you just said this, and look at the expression on that other person's face. Let's do it over, but this time I want you to say something that makes so-and-so feel good, right? Or let's do it over, but I want you to say something that lets so-and-so feel included. So rather than just chastising the student, practice it immediately. Call it out. Say, this was not a nice thing to say. This didn't really sound like you. So let's do it over, but let's practice right now. Let's do it over, and let's see if we can change the outcome. Role play is similar, but it's something that you don't necessarily do with two students. You do it just one, right? So you hear something, you see something, right? And rather than involving both students, you just pull over the offender and you say, you know what? Let's role play. I'm going to say what you just said, and then you pretend like you're the other person. Tell me how it feels when I don't include you, or when I make fun of your hair, or when I do such and such. And so what we're doing is we're trying to put the student in the role of the other student whose feelings were just hurt, and just kind of let them stew in it a little bit. Obviously, we can go overboard on this, so we want to do it with delicacy, but that's what empathy is, right? Feeling what others feel, and sometimes they have to be on the receiving end of it to understand, wow, those words hurt, or wow, that really wasn't the best action I could have taken. And then sometimes freeze and think. This is something, if there's something that in the middle of something, you can just freeze, right? So if you hear two students, maybe they're arguing and it's going south, but it's not over yet, you can freeze and you say, all right, guys, let's freeze. And then you talk to the student who's not making good choices. Say, I want you to look at so-and-so's face. What do you think is going through his mind right now? And is that what we want? Or freeze, take a look at his body language, or freeze, take a look at what it looks like his hands are doing, his feet are doing, right? There's something that you want to freeze and get the person who's making the poor choices to really examine or to think about. And then you unfreeze and you let them continue. But this time, hopefully, the conversation takes a different route. So these are just some things you can do. We don't need to punish everything, right? We don't need to worry about, well, let's give these students marks, or let's take away classroom points or classroom money, anything like that. That's not the point of any of this. The point is to increase empathy, and a lot of it comes from practicing in the moment, taking those opportunities to just jump on it right then and right there, and let them practice, and then that's it. That's the consequences. They need to practice it again. It doesn't need to escalate to anything worse than that. So, empathy is super important, but it rests on the foundation of emotional literacy. How can I feel what you feel if I can't even label and describe those feelings, right? So we start with emotional literacy. We make sure our students have a rich and nuanced emotional vocabulary. They understand how emotions work, where they come from, how we can regulate them. And then that next step is that empathy. And if I can help you feel, and I can understand what you feel, then I'm going to be able to be a lot more empathetic. I'm going to have a lot less bullying, a lot less aggression, and that's going to help everything we need in the classroom. So thank you as always for watching. You can learn more about this series or any episodes you might have watched or even the book at aarondaffern.com/takecharge. You can email me or you can follow me on Twitter at Aaron Daffern.